It turns out the most extreme, dire predictions were true. Hi, I'm Scott Ott with Bill Whittle and Stephen Green. This episode of Right Angle is brought to you by the members at BillWhittle.com. And gentlemen, I am talking about the news out of a Dallas, Texas-based firm called Colossus Bioscience that has revealed that the dire wolf, an extinct species, has been, in their terms, de-extincted. And gentlemen, this is a little more subtle than the headline indicates. They basically found some old DNA in a tooth and a skull fragment from this species of wolf that scientists believe died off about 10,000 years ago. One of the samples they think was about 12,500 years old. Another sample may have been about 73,000 years old. But it's not like they just took that DNA and slapped it in a hollowed out wolf egg and then had a surrogate wolf mom carry that to term. They actually studied the DNA that they found from the dire wolf, Steve Green, and they used that to edit the DNA in a modern wolf that had the closest DNA match that they could find as far as the species clever. Goes. And so essentially, Steve, they're not saying this in the article, but here's what I'm calling it. They made a replica. They made a replica of a dire wolf. They managed to bring 3 cubs to term, 2 boys, Romulus and Remus, I think, and I think there was a girl, but I can't remember her name.
Khaleesi.
It was from the show, right? So apparently the dire wolf appears in Game of Thrones, a show that I have never seen, a point of pride that I shall take to my grave. But Steve, I think this brings up some fascinating questions. We've talked before about this company because their intention is to recreate the woolly mammoth. And their overt mission is to restore the biodiversity of Earth by being able to so-called de-extinct these creatures. But it seems to me that a little bit of thought would indicate, well, that biodiversity has changed so dramatically over the years that I wonder whether the dire wolf and the woolly mammoth are going to feel at home here anymore. Right now, they're living on a giant game preserve somewhere in Texas that is fenced off with like a 10-foot high fence designed to keep them in. But Steve, is this just like a freakish dream? I mean, the guy who wrote Game of Thrones has put investment money into this effort. Is this just some weird kind of chimera experiment, or is there value to it?
Well, finally, now I know what George R.R. Martin is doing with his time instead of writing the last book.
Yes.
Anyway, to be clear, what they have not de-extincted the dire wolf. What they have done is to de-extinct certain dire wolf attributes. Because these are, as you said, they didn't use the complete DNA sequence. They decoded the whole thing, took out the relevant bits, spliced that into existing gray wolf DNA. So they're not actually de-extincting anything, which is, on the one hand, kind of a shame. On the other hand, the Earth that the dire wolf, and more importantly, the dire wolf's prey, that Earth doesn't exist anymore. It was colder. It was icier. There were, glaciers down your way in Texas, damn near. It's a different world. The dire wolf is quite a bit larger than a regular wolf, and they don't have a common ancestor. Dire wolves split off from wolves, which eventually also gave us dogs, apparently millions of years ago. So these are different branches. And they had more muscle, more weight. They get up to 150, maybe even 200 pounds compared to 100 to 120 for a gray wolf. They've got wider, more muscular jaws with
They can crunch that teeth. Kibble. That's right.
No, they can crush like mammoth bones. These are big wolves, these things. And you can't even really think of them as wolves for that reason. As I said, they're a different branch. What I find interesting, though, is, did you see the video of the puppies?
Yes.
Those beautiful off-white puppies, and they're howling
with their tiny little voices. Yeah.
Yes. So this got me thinking to a conversation I've had many times with my oldest son, probably since about the time he was 14 or 15. He's 19 now. He swore to me for years, and he was probably mostly teasing, that what he really wants for a pet when he gets his own place is a bear. And, you have the dad talk about how cool that would be, but you can't really have a bear for a pet for these reasons. And he wouldn't listen because it's really fun to, tease dad about this kind of thing. So he wanted either a bear or a German Shepherd. What he really wants is a bear, a big cuddly bear with a German Shepherd domesticated personality, which would actually be really cool. So my question for Colossus, because they got to make money. They can't just get investments from George R.R. Martin all the time because, he doesn't write books anymore. And what I'm thinking is, can you de-extinct these desirable, the ones we think are cute, these desirable direwolf characteristics, not into modern gray wolf DNA, but say into modern German Shepherd DNA, and get something that kind of sounds like a direwolf, but is still a domesticated dog. And if they can do this, I think the commercial aspects would be huge. I mean, I'd want one for damn sure. I've wanted a direwolf since I first learned about it in the stupid show I quit watching before they quit running it, Game of Thrones. If you can do that, great, but you've got to find out first whether or not those desirable attributes come with the wild aspect of the animal, the untamable aspect of the animal. And if you can't get one without the other, then what are we doing here, really? Because you can't release these things out into the wild because their planet doesn't exist anymore. And if you can't introduce it into some sort of domestic aspect that people will want to have as pets, that people can have as pets, then really, Scott, what are they doing? What's the point?
Bill Whittle, we've talked before about the unintended consequences of introducing new creatures into an environment or removing creatures from an environment, and how that ripple effect that happens. Do you think this is really a misallocation of resources, of trying to dip back into ancient history to find creatures that we think we would like to bring back, or creatures that we have available DNA for, and so therefore we can do something with that, and that's diverting resources from trying to preserve creatures that already are here and are threatened or look like they might go extinct? Wouldn't it be better for organizations like Colossus to pour their money into preventing extinction of creatures that exist already?
Well, not to throw any cold water on Steve's desire to own a dire cockadoodle, but
DireDoodle,
a dire dog,
a DireDoodle, first of all, there is already a number of institutions that preserve endangered DNA, so that's, I think that's already done. I think if you're going to name yourself Colossus Biodiversity or whatever, you better be working on either restoring the mammoth or implementing Skynet, because that is the most evil name you can possibly imagine. I am a little
Colossus, the Forbin Project.
Yes,
classic
exactly.
70s.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. I'm a little concerned that when they write the history books, is that humanity ended with the return of the wolf pox. It's got a little bit of a worry for me. But generally speaking, I actually think this is all really, really cool, and to the degree that it can be completely done, because Steve's right. It's a chimera. It's a half and half. Well, the plan to restore the woolly mammoth is to take woolly mammoth DNA, inject it into an elephant egg. The elephant gives birth to the woolly mammoth that's half mammoth, half elephant, and then you keep doing the process, keep replacing the. Then you put more woolly mammoth DNA into what's already half woolly mammoth, and you eventually get your way closer there. You're never really quite getting it the same. It's not like they can monoclonally do the DNA, but that technology may not be impossible, especially with the rise of AI assistants. We may find a way to do that. I personally think the idea of Jurassic Park is actually really cool. One of the things you may notice about the Jurassic Park movies is that the humans somehow miraculously find themselves to be unarmed, because I'm actually not terrified of a T-Rex coming down the street. Well, at least I was until I lost all of my weapons in the tragic boating accident.
With
but
the
other than that,
ordinance, it'll be okay.
With the appropriate ordinance, it's not the big animals that we need to be afraid of. It's the tiny, 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 tiny little ones that are the real threat. But I not only do I think this would be good, and interesting. And be perfectly honest with you, I think it's fun. I think it's just cool.
It is.
But there's also, it seems to me to be a kind of a moral component as well. Now, we didn't extinct the dire wolf, at least not modern humans did. That's not to say that there won't be groups out there calling for wolf reparations any day now. I have no doubt about that. But the idea that that we could undo some of the damage that we've done is a compelling idea. I think that the thing that needs to be said in this discussion is that if you just stop killing animals, their ability to return is astonishing. When I was a small boy, my dad took me to the Museum of Science in New York and said, "You will never see a blue whale. You might as well look at this plaster one." He told me I'd never see a bald eagle. He told me, these animals were on their way out and there was no stopping them. If you stop killing them, there's an entire ecological niche that they once filled that is wide open, and they just move right back in there, and their numbers just explode. The blue whale's a perfect example because it's the largest animal that ever lived, and I thought I'd never see one in the ocean, and now they're constantly doing. Here's a pod of 300 we didn't know about, and here's another 400 over here, and you see these things gliding through the water, and it's ultimately a repudiation, Scott, of this narrative that humans are this killer species that has denuded the planet of all life, and now we live in this sterilized world of dead oceans, where it's just a matter of time before we all kick the bucket, and deservedly so.
I may have inadvertently referred to the company as Colossus. It's Colossal Biosciences.
Oh, okay.
That's a headquarter. I can't remember exactly how I said that. I think this is fascinating science, and I think it'll have side benefits of helping us to understand better what we can do with gene editing, for example, and how focused and controlled we can be about that process, for example, without introducing variants that cause problems, that are more susceptible to disease or that spread disease, or that cause deformations. I remember it was the first attempts to do Dolly the sheep. Didn't Dolly have some sort of major physical problems too?
It lacked a certain robustness, if I remember correctly.
Yeah.
So
anyway, from that aspect, it's fascinating. And on your Jurassic Park thought, Jurassic Park would only survive as a concept if it was called Jurassic Hunting Ranch. If it was Jurassic Hunting Ranch, then it would be financially sustainable. You can't just make it a park. It's got to be a place where guys can go and shoot those things.
And try the raptor burgers.
That's right. And I don't know where this came from, but the other day you mentioned the bald eagle. I saw a clip of a baseball player in a Major League Baseball game. Somehow, a bald eagle, I don't know if it was a domesticated bald eagle or a wild bald eagle, flew out onto the field while the game was going on and tried to land on this guy's shoulder. And he just kind of stood still, kind of paralyzed. It kind of tried to land and then went down on the ground, and then it hopped back up and tried to get on his back again. And he just sort of stood there trying not to, look like food.
He's not going to wear that cologne again.
Anyway, it is fascinating. And honestly, once the technology is available, it's almost impossible to keep people from trying to do things like this. But I think that the spin-off effects are more likely to be of value versus the actual value of bringing back a woolly mammoth or bringing back something that looks like a dire wolf. In any case, it makes a great story, even for somebody who never watched Game of Thrones. And one of the interesting comments I saw in the story was they say, it turns out we think that the dire wolf was probably white because that's how these puppies came out. These puppies were all white, and most wolves are not all white. And so,
glacial period, though, right?
Yeah. So they're learning things about these creatures. So anyway, the advance of science is helpful, and as long as they're not torturing anybody in the process or ruining the environment as a consequence, I'm all for it. For Bill Whittle and Stephen Green, I'm Scott Ott. Thanks to the members at BillWhittle.com for making Right Angle possible.